Oh, don't worry, Liv. I'm sure Dad left you something. Maybe the garden shed? Marcus's voice cut through the lawyer's office like a blade wrapped in silk. He didn't even look at me when he said it. Just stared at his phone, smirking, while Mom squeezed his shoulder like he'd just told a harmless joke. I felt my jaw tighten, not from shock, from familiarity. My name is Olivia Smith. I'm 34 years old. I work as a marketing consultant in Portland, Oregon, and I've spent my entire life being the backup child. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and lemon furniture polish. Mr. Callahan sat across from us, a manila folder centered perfectly on his mahogany desk. Dad had been dead 3 weeks. The funeral was small, the grief was complicated. Marcus stretched in his chair, all 6'2" of him taking up space the way he always had. 37 years old and still the golden son, still the one who mattered. Marcus, Mom said softly, but she was smiling, that gentle smile that said boys will be boys without saying anything at all. I looked down at my hands. My purse strap was cutting into my palm. I'd been gripping it so hard my knuckles had gone white. Mr. Callahan cleared his throat. He was maybe 60, with wire-rimmed glasses, and the careful expression of a man who'd seen too many families fall apart in this room. "Shall we begin?" he asked. Marcus waved a hand. "Sure, let's get this done. I've got a meeting at 3. Mom nodded, folding her hands in her lap. She looked tired. She'd looked tired since Dad's diagnosis 2 years ago, pancreatic cancer. Quick and cruel. I said nothing. I'd learned a long time ago that silence was safer than hoping to be heard. Mr. Callahan opened the folder. The sound of paper sliding against paper filled the room. Marcus leaned back. Mom adjusted her necklace. The pearl one. Dad bought her for their 30th anniversary. I held my breath without meaning to. This was the moment that would confirm what I'd always known. That I was loved, maybe, but not chosen, not celebrated. Not the one who got the pride, and the attention and the Sunday dinners that actually mattered. Dad had been a good man, a kind man, but he'd had a favorite, and everyone knew it. Marcus got the business talks at 16. I got a college fund and a pat on the head. Marcus got mentorship. I got politeness. When I graduated summa cum laude from University of Oregon, Dad left my graduation dinner early to attend Marcus's work event, a client meeting that couldn't be rescheduled. I stopped competing around 22, stopped trying to earn something that was never going to be given. I built my own life, my own career, moved to a different part of the city, loved my father from a distance that didn't hurt as much. But I never stopped feeling it, that old familiar ache of being tolerated. Mr. Callahan adjusted his glasses. The last will and testament of Richard James Smith, executed on March 14th of this year, 2 months before he died. He knew it was coming. To my son Marcus Richard Smith, I leave Smith & Sons Printing, including all assets, client contracts, equipment and intellectual property associated with the business. Marcus nodded, expected. Mom smiled, also expected. I felt nothing, just the same old numbness. To my wife Patricia Ann Smith, I leave the entirety of my retirement accounts, life insurance policy, and personal savings, totaling approximately $470,000. Mom's eyes welled up. She pressed a tissue to her nose. Mr. Callahan paused, looked at me. Something in his expression shifted, not pity, something closer to respect. To my daughter Olivia Marie Smith, I leave the family home located at 4215 Northeast Alameda Street, Portland, Oregon, including all contents, furnishings and property, free and clear of all encumbrances. The house. I blinked. Marcus's head snapped up. Wait, the house? Mr. Callahan nodded. The house is valued at approximately $850,000, fully paid off. Mom's face tightened, just slightly, just enough. Marcus stared at me, not angry yet, just confused, like he couldn't quite process why I'd gotten something of actual value. Huh, he said. Okay, that's good, Liv. The house is nice. His tone said, but it's not the business. Mr. Callahan wasn't finished. There's also an additional document, a sealed letter addressed to Olivia, to be opened privately. He slid a cream-colored envelope across the desk. My name was written on it in Dad's shaky handwriting. Marcus scoffed. A consolation letter. That's sweet. Mom said nothing, just dabbed at her eyes. I reached for the envelope. My fingers felt numb. Mr. Callahan's voice was carefully neutral. That concludes the primary distribution. If there are any questions regarding the business transition, Marcus, we can schedule a follow-up meeting. Marcus was already pulling out his phone. Yeah, let's do that. I want to get the paperwork moving fast. Start the transfer. Get the accounts sorted. He stood, stretched, checked his watch. Mom gathered her purse, glancing at me. Are you all right, sweetheart? I nodded. I'm fine. She didn't believe me, but she didn't push. Marcus was halfway to the door, already talking to someone on the phone about quarterly projections. I stood slowly, the envelope pressed against my chest. No one noticed me leave. No one ever did. Mr. Callahan cleared his throat. Shall we begin? I didn't open the letter until I got home. My apartment was small, a one-bedroom in southeast Portland with a view of a parking lot and a coffee shop I liked. I'd lived there for 6 years. It was mine, paid for with my own work, my own clients. The walls were cream-colored, chosen by the previous tenant. I'd never bothered to repaint them. The furniture was mismatched. A couch from IKEA, a coffee table from a garage sale, bookshelves I'd assembled myself on a rainy Sunday 3 years ago. It wasn't much, but it was the first place that had ever truly belonged to me. No one else's name on the lease, no one else's approval required, just mine. I made tea, Earl Grey, the kind that came in the blue tin I bought from the grocery store on Hawthorne, put on music, Joni Mitchell, Blue. Dad used to play her on Sunday mornings when I was a kid, back when the house still felt warm and full of possibility. Before Marcus became the center of everything, I remembered sitting at the kitchen table, watching Dad flip pancakes, while Joni sang about rivers and skating away. He'd hum along, off-key but happy. Those mornings felt like a lifetime ago, like they'd happened to someone else. The envelope sat on my kitchen table, staring at me. I circled it like a cat circling something it doesn't trust. Made my tea, stirred in honey, took a sip, set the mug down, looked at the envelope again. It was cream-colored, expensive paper, the kind Dad used for important things, business contracts, thank you notes to major clients, letters that mattered. This mattered. I could feel it in the weight of the paper, in the way my father's handwriting looked on the front, shaky but deliberate. My name in his careful script, Olivia Marie Smith, not Liv, not sweetheart. My full name, the name he'd given me 34 years ago in a hospital room I'd never seen, but had heard about 1,000 times. Mom's labor had been 18 hours. I was born at dawn. Marcus had been born at noon, 3 years earlier, after only 6 hours. Even my birth had taken longer, required more effort, been less convenient. I thought about Marcus, about the way he'd looked at me in that office. Not cruel, just dismissive, like I'd gotten the participation trophy, like Dad had given me something to make me feel included. But everyone knew what really mattered. The business, the legacy, the thing with actual value. The business was worth over $2 million. Everyone knew that. Smith & Sons had been around for 40 years. Dad built it from nothing, started in a garage with a single offset press he'd bought used from a newspaper going out of business, taught himself the trade, worked 18-hour days, built a client list through sheer persistence and quality work. By the time I was born, he had a real shop, employees, contracts with local businesses, nonprofits, political campaigns. By the time I was 10, he had 2 locations. By the time I graduated high school, Smith & Sons was the go-to print shop in Northeast Portland. Marcus had been groomed for it since he was 16, spent summers working the presses, learning the business from the ground up. Dad would bring him to client meetings, introduce him as my son, the future of Smith & Sons. Marcus ate it up, loved every minute, and why wouldn't he? He was being handed a kingdom. I got the house. It was something. It was more than I'd expected. Honestly, I'd thought maybe I'd get some money, maybe a piece of jewelry that had belonged to Grandma, maybe a token gesture that said I didn't forget about you entirely. But the house, the actual house, the Craftsman on Alameda where I'd grown up, where I'd learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where I'd had my first kiss on the porch swing when I was 15, that house was worth $850,000. In Portland's market, that wasn't nothing, but it still felt like less than the business, less than the legacy, less than what Marcus got. I picked up the envelope, turned it over in my hands. The seal was wax, dark red, old-fashioned, Dad's style. He'd always been particular about things like that, believed in doing things the right way, the traditional way. Handwritten thank you notes, wax seals, firm handshakes, looking people in the eye. He was old school in ways that felt charming when you were on his good side, and frustrating when you weren't. I broke the seal, the wax cracked cleanly. I pulled out the letter, 2 pages, handwritten on the same cream-colored stationery. His script was shaky. Those last months had been hard, the cancer eating away at more than just his body, but clear enough. I could read every word. Olivia, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I didn't say more when I had the chance. I'm not good with words, never have been. I felt something twist in my chest. He was right. He'd never been good with words, at least not with me. With Marcus, he'd been effusive, proud, full of praise and encouragement. With me he'd been polite, distant, like he was talking to a colleague's daughter at a company picnic. The house is yours, but it's more than just a house. There's something Marcus doesn't know, something I need you to find before he starts asking questions. I stopped. Reread that line. Something Marcus doesn't know. My pulse quickened. In the basement, behind the electrical panel on the south wall, there's a false plate. Remove it. Inside you'll find a safety deposit box key taped to the frame. The box is at Northwest Community Bank, under my name. Use the inheritance documents to access it. A key, hidden in the house, in a place Marcus would never think to look. Inside the box there are papers, financial records, business documents, things Marcus needs to see but won't want to believe. My hands started to shake, not from sadness, from something else, something sharper, more urgent. You were always the one who paid attention, Liv. I'm sorry I didn't say that more. I stopped breathing. Read that line again, and again. You were always the one who paid attention. Dad had noticed. He'd seen me, not in the way I'd wanted. Not with pride at my achievements, not with interest in my life. But he'd seen something, some quality, some capacity, attention. I'd spent my whole life paying attention, watching Marcus get praised, and wondering what I was doing wrong. Watching Mom light up when Marcus walked into a room and dim when I did. Watching Dad teach Marcus about business, and barely ask me about my marketing work, even though I was good at it. Even though I'd built a successful freelance career from nothing, I'd been paying attention to all of it. Every slight, every dismissal, every moment of being second, and somehow Dad had known. Go to the house, get the key, read the documents, then decide what to do. I gave you the house because it's paid off, free and clear, no debt, no strings. Marcus got the business, but the business isn't what he thinks it is. I felt my stomach drop. The business isn't what he thinks it is. What did that mean? I'm sorry I couldn't protect you both, but I could protect you. I love you. I always did. Dad, I read it 3 times, then a 4th, then a 5th. My hands were shaking harder now. The paper trembled between my fingers, not from sadness, from something else, something I couldn't name yet, something that felt like anger and grief and vindication all mixed together. Dad had left me instructions, not sentimentality, not apologies wrapped in pretty words, not the kind of letter you frame and put on your wall and cry over at holidays. Instructions, like I was the one he trusted to handle something important, something Marcus couldn't, something that required the very quality Dad had just named. Attention. The tea went cold. The music played. Joni sang about California and clouds and looking at life from both sides now. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the letter, feeling something I hadn't felt in years, seen, but also confused, and suspicious. What didn't Marcus know? What was in that safety deposit box? What had Dad hidden from his golden son? I looked at the clock. It was almost 8, too late to go to the house tonight. The sun had set an hour ago. The house would be dark, empty. I didn't even know if the electricity was still on, but I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, questions piling on top of questions. I reread the letter, focused on one line. The business isn't what he thinks it is. What did that mean? Marcus had been talking about expansion, about honoring Dad's legacy, about building something even bigger. He'd mentioned it at the funeral reception, standing in the living room of that very house, surrounded by people offering condolences. He'd talked about taking Smith & Sons to the next level. Digital services, web to print, maybe even a second location in Beaverton. He'd been so confident in that lawyer's office, so sure of what he'd inherited, so certain that he'd gotten the prize and I'd gotten the consolation. What if he was wrong? What if the business wasn't the empire he thought it was? What if Dad had left him something far more complicated than a success story? I folded the letter carefully, creased it along the original lines, put it back in the envelope, tucked it into my purse. In the inner pocket, where I kept important things, my passport, my social security card, things I couldn't afford to lose. Then I sat in the dark, thinking about my father, about the man who taught Marcus everything about printing presses and profit margins and client relations, the man who never once asked me about my work, who smiled politely when I talked about landing a new client, but lit up like a Christmas tree when Marcus closed a deal, who introduced Marcus as my son, the future of the business, and me as my daughter. She does marketing or something. The man who in his final act had left me a key and a warning. I didn't know what I was going to find in that safety deposit box, but I knew one thing. Dad hadn't given me the house out of pity, hadn't given it to me because he felt guilty for favoring Marcus, hadn't given it to me as a consolation prize. He'd given it to me because he knew I'd do something with it, something Marcus couldn't, something that required attention, strategy, the ability to see what others missed. I stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the parking lot, at the coffee shop with its warm lights and people inside laughing and talking, and I made a decision. I drove to the house the next morning. Before sunrise, I needed to know. The house looked smaller in the gray pre-dawn light. 4215 Northeast Alameda, a craftsman-style home, with a wide front porch, and a maple tree in the yard that Dad planted the year I was born. I sat in my car for a moment. Engine off, hands still gripping the steering wheel. The street was empty, no joggers yet, no dog walkers, just me in the house, and the weight of Dad's letter folded in my purse. The maple tree had grown taller than I remembered. Its branches stretched over the front yard like protective arms. I remembered Dad digging the hole for it, shirt soaked with sweat, telling me that trees were investments, that they'd outlive us all if we took care of them. I wondered if he knew, even then, that this house would be mine someday. The porch light was off. Mom must have turned it off after the funeral reception, after everyone left, after the casseroles were eaten, and the condolence cards were stacked on the dining room table. I hadn't been inside since the funeral reception, 3 weeks ago. People everywhere, casseroles on every surface, Marcus holding court in the living room, accepting condolences like a politician. I remembered standing in the corner by the bookshelf, watching him, watching people hug him, tell him how sorry they were, how proud Dad would be of him taking over the business. No one asked me how I was doing. A few people hugged me, distant cousins, Dad's old friends, but their eyes were already moving past me, looking for Marcus, looking for Mom, looking for someone more important to comfort. I'd left early, told Mom I had a headache. She'd nodded absently, already turning back to a conversation about Dad's favorite hymn. Now it was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, expectant, like the house was waiting for me. I got out of the car. The air was cold, damp, that Portland spring morning, cold that seeps into your bones. I pulled my jacket tighter and walked up the front path. The porch steps creaked under my weight. They'd always creaked. Dad had talked about fixing them for years but never got around to it. Now they were mine to fix, or not fix, my choice. I unlocked the front door with the key Mr. Callahan had given me. The hinges creaked. The air inside smelled like dust and old furniture, and something I couldn't name. Memory maybe, or grief, or both. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me. The sound echoed through the empty rooms. The living room was to my left. The furniture was still arranged exactly how it had been during the reception. The couch where Marcus had sat, the armchair where Mom had perched, tissue box in her lap. The coffee table still had a water ring from someone's glass. I looked away, didn't want to remember that day. I didn't turn on the lights, just used my phone flashlight, and walked straight through the kitchen to the basement door. The kitchen felt frozen in time. Dad's coffee mug still sat by the sink. Mom must have left it there, or maybe she couldn't bring herself to wash it. His reading glasses were on the counter, folded next to a stack of unopened mail. I touched the mug. The ceramic was cold. Everything in this house was cold now. I opened the basement door. The smell hit me immediately. Concrete, mildew, that particular scent of unfinished basements that never quite goes away. The stairs groaned under my weight. The basement was unfinished. Concrete floor, exposed beams, Dad's old workbench in the corner, covered in tools he'd stopped using years ago. I swept my phone light across the space. Boxes stacked against the far wall, Christmas decorations, old tax documents, things Dad couldn't throw away, but didn't need anymore. My light caught something else, a dartboard hanging on the wall. I'd forgotten about that. Dad used to play darts down here on Sunday afternoons, said it helped him think. I wondered what he'd been thinking about all those times. The business, the debt, how to protect me without telling me why I needed protecting. The electrical panel was on the south wall, just like he'd said. I walked over to it. My footsteps echoed on the concrete. The panel was old, gray metal, paint chipped at the corners. I opened it. Rows of circuit breakers, labels in Dad's handwriting, kitchen, living room, garage. His handwriting looked shaky on some of the labels, the newer ones, from after the diagnosis, probably, when his hands started trembling. I ran my fingers along the edge of the panel, felt something loose, a metal plate, smaller than the others, held in place with 2 screws. My heart started beating faster. This was it. This was what Dad had told me to find. I looked around for tools. The workbench was covered in sawdust, wrenches, hammers, a tackle box full of screws and nails. I found a screwdriver on the workbench, removed the screws, pulled the plate free. My hands were shaking now, not from cold, from something else, anticipation, fear, the strange feeling of following instructions from someone who was gone. Behind it, taped to the metal frame, was a small brass key. I peeled it off carefully, turned it over in my palm. It was labeled with a bank name I didn't recognize, Northwest Community Bank, and a number, 347. The key was warm from being taped against the metal. Or maybe that was just my imagination. I stood there in the basement, holding the key, feeling my heartbeat in my throat. Dad had hidden this, deliberately, carefully. He'd planned this, months ago, maybe years ago. He'd known I'd come here, known I'd follow his instructions, known I'd find what he'd left for me. He'd left me a map, not just to the key, to something bigger, something Marcus didn't know about, something that would change everything. I closed my fist around the key, felt the metal edges press into my palm. For a moment I just stood there in the basement, surrounded by Dad's tools and his boxes and his unfinished projects. The house was so quiet, I could hear my own breathing. I thought about calling Marcus, telling him what I'd found, asking him if Dad had ever mentioned a safety deposit box. But I didn't, because Dad had left this for me, not for Marcus, not for both of us. For me, and that meant something. I put the key in my pocket, replaced the plate, screwed it back in. My hands were steadier now, more certain. I closed the electrical panel, turned off my phone light, stood in the darkness for just a moment, letting my eyes adjust. The basement didn't feel scary anymore, just sad, full of things that used to matter, and didn't anymore. I walked back up the stairs, through the kitchen, past Dad's coffee mug and his reading glasses. I didn't look at the living room, didn't want to see the water ring on the coffee table, or remember Marcus accepting condolences like he was the only one who'd lost something. I walked out the front door, locked it behind me. The porch steps creaked again. The sky was lighter now, still gray, but with a hint of pink at the edges. Dawn coming. I got in my car, put the key on the passenger seat, stared at it. Northwest Community Bank, Box 347. What was inside? Documents, Dad had said. Financial records. Things Marcus needed to see but wouldn't want to believe. I started the car. The engine hummed to life. I should have felt nervous, uncertain, scared, even. But I didn't. I felt clear, focused, like I was finally doing something that mattered, like I was finally the one with the answers, instead of the one left in the dark. Then I left the house, and drove straight to the bank. Northwest Community Bank was a small branch in northeast Portland, brick building, older, the kind of place that still had safety deposit boxes, instead of just digital accounts. The building sat on a corner lot, wedged between a vintage clothing store and a Thai restaurant that had been there since the 90s. The brick was weathered, dark red with patches of moss creeping up from the foundation. There were bars on the windows, not the modern decorative kind, but actual iron bars that had been there for decades. A faded sign above the entrance read, Est, 1,967 inches in gold lettering that had started to peel. I pulled into the small parking lot at 8:57, sat in my car for a moment, engine running, heater blasting against the morning chill. The brass key felt heavy in my jacket pocket. I'd been carrying it since yesterday, checking every few hours to make sure it was still there, like it might disappear if I wasn't careful. Through the bank's front window, I could see fluorescent lights flickering, a woman in a cardigan arranging pamphlets on a display rack, an older man in a suit walking past with a coffee mug. Normal people doing normal things. They had no idea what I was about to discover. Neither did I. I turned off the engine, grabbed my purse, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked tired. I'd barely slept, kept thinking about Dad's letter, about the words he'd chosen. The business isn't what he thinks it is. I got out of the car. The morning air was sharp and cold. October in Portland. The kind of weather where you needed a jacket, but the sun made you think you didn't. I walked to the entrance. The door was heavy, solid wood with a brass handle worn smooth from decades of hands. It creaked when I pushed it open. Inside, the bank smelled like old paper and carpet cleaner, the kind of smell that belonged to buildings that hadn't been renovated since the 80s. The carpet was maroon with a geometric pattern. The walls were paneled in dark wood. There were framed photos of Portland landmarks from the 60s and 70s, the Steel Bridge, the old Meyer and Frank building, Mount Hood in black and white. The lobby was quiet, just me and the woman in the cardigan behind the teller counter. She looked up when I entered, her face arranging itself into a professional smile. "Good morning," she said. "Can I help you?" Her name tag read Jennifer. She was maybe 50, with short gray hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. I walked to the counter, set my purse down. My hands were shaking slightly, so I pressed them flat against the cool marble surface. "I need to access a safety deposit box," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. It was my father's. Richard Smith. He passed away 3 weeks ago. Jennifer's expression shifted immediately. The professional smile softened into something more genuine, more human. I'm so sorry for your loss, she said. I nodded, pulled out the key. The inheritance documents Mr. Callahan had given me. My driver's license. Jennifer took them carefully, handling the documents like they were fragile. She looked at the key, turned it over, checked the number stamped on the brass. 347. Let me pull up the account, she said. She typed on her computer, her fingers moving slowly over the keyboard. The clicks were loud in the quiet lobby. I could hear a clock ticking somewhere, the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Okay, Jennifer said after a moment. I see the box is registered to Richard James Smith, and according to our records, you're listed as the beneficiary. But I'll need to call my manager to verify the documentation. It's just protocol for estate access. That's fine, I said. She picked up the phone, had a brief quiet conversation. I caught fragments. Inheritance documents, beneficiary access. Yes, she's here now. I stood at the counter, trying not to fidget, trying not to think too hard about what might be in that box. A man emerged from an office in the back. Mid-60s, gray suit, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He introduced himself as Mr. Patterson, the branch manager. He shook my hand, offered his condolences, asked to see the documents again. I handed them over, watching as he read through each page carefully. His expression was neutral, professional, but I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes when he looked at the inheritance certificate, something like recognition. Had he known my father? Everything appears to be in order, Mr. Patterson said finally. I'll just need you to sign a few access forms. Standard procedure. Jennifer slid a clipboard across the counter. 3 forms. I signed each one, my signature looking shaky and unfamiliar. Mr. Patterson collected the forms. If you'll follow me, I'll take you to the vault room. I picked up my purse, followed him through a door marked authorized personnel only. The hallway beyond was narrow and dim, more dark wood paneling, more old carpet. We passed a break room, where I glimpsed a microwave and a coffee maker, an office with the door half open, papers stacked on every surface. At the end of the hallway was a heavy metal door. Mr. Patterson pulled out a key ring, selected a key, unlocked it. The vault room was small, concrete walls painted institutional beige. No windows, a single overhead light that cast harsh shadows. There was a metal table in the center and 2 chairs. Nothing else. The walls were lined with small metal doors, safety deposit boxes. Hundreds of them, each with a number stamped on a brass plate. Mr. Patterson walked to the wall on the left, scanned the numbers, found 347. He inserted a master key into one lock, then held out his hand for my key. I gave it to him, my fingers brushing his palm. He inserted my key into the second lock, turned both keys simultaneously. The lock clicked. He pulled open the small door, revealing a metal box inside. He slid it out carefully. It was longer than I'd expected, heavier. He carried it to the table, set it down with a soft thud. Take all the time you need, he said. Just press the button by the door when you're ready to leave. I'll come back to secure the box. Thank you, I said. He left, closing the door behind him with a solid click, and then I was alone. The room was silent, except for the hum of the ventilation system. The air was cool, sterile. I stood there for a moment, staring at the box on the table. It was metal, gray, industrial, about the size of a shoebox, maybe a little longer. There was a thin layer of dust on the lid, like it hadn't been opened in a while. How long had Dad been planning this? I pulled out one of the chairs. The legs scraped against the concrete floor. I sat down slowly, my heart beating too fast. My hands hovered over the box. I could still walk away, could tell Mr. Patterson I'd changed my mind, could leave this room and never know what Dad had hidden. But I'd come this far. I lifted the lid. Inside was a thick folder. Manila. The kind with an accordion bottom that expands to hold lots of papers. It was stuffed full, the edges of documents peeking out from the top. There was a rubber band around it. I slipped it off, set it aside. On the front of the folder, in Dad's handwriting, were 3 words for Olivia only. My throat tightened. I opened the folder carefully, spreading it flat on the table. Inside were documents, lots of them, organized with colored tabs. Dad's system. He'd always been meticulous about filing, even when Marcus complained the office was a mess. The first tab was labeled Loan Agreement, 2020. I pulled out the papers, started reading. Commercial loan. $1.8 million. Smith & Sons Printing as the borrower, secured against business assets and future revenue. Interest rate, 6.5%. Term 10 years. Quarterly payments, $65,000. I flipped to the next page. Then the next. Read through the terms and conditions. The collateral agreements. The default clauses. My hands started shaking. The second tab was labeled Refinancing 2022. More documents. Another loan agreement. Same amount. Different terms. Dad had refinanced to lower the interest rate, but extended the term. The third tab. Payment schedule. A spreadsheet in Dad's handwriting. Dates, amounts. Check numbers. Every payment he'd made for the last 5 years. The last entry was from 3 months before he died. After that, nothing. I sat back in the chair, stared at the concrete wall. The business was mortgaged, heavily, $1.8 million in debt. Marcus had inherited a business worth $2.3 million on paper, but after the debt, it was worth $500,000. Maybe, if he could keep it profitable, if he could make the payments, if he didn't overextend. I pulled out the last section of the folder, a single piece of paper, handwritten. Dad's shaky script from those final weeks. Liv, Marcus doesn't know the business is mortgaged. He thinks it's free and clear. It's not. The house is. I gave you the asset. I gave him the debt. I'm sorry, but I knew you'd be okay. I wasn't sure about him. Dad, I read it 3 times. Then I understood. Dad hadn't made a mistake. Hadn't forgotten to tell Marcus about the loan. He'd hidden it. Deliberately, he'd given Marcus the appearance of success. The title. The pride. The thing everyone would celebrate. And he'd given me the foundation. The security. The thing no one could take away. He knew Marcus would assume, would spend, would overreach, and he knew I wouldn't. This wasn't an accident. It was a test. And a gift. I sat in that small concrete room, surrounded by documents that told the story of my father's final act, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Not sadness. Understanding. Cold, clear, strategic understanding. Marcus was walking into a trap, and I was holding the map. Tax documents. Business filings. Partnership agreements. Loan records. I started reading, and then I understood. The business was mortgaged. Not a little. A lot. $1.8 million. Secured against future revenue and equipment. I read the number 3 times, my eyes tracing over Dad's careful handwriting in the margin where he'd calculated and recalculated the terms. 1.8 million. The words felt heavy in my mouth, even though I wasn't saying them aloud. This wasn't some small business loan you took out to buy a new printer or upgrade the computers. This was serious debt. The kind that could crush you if you weren't careful. The documents were organized in Dad's meticulous way. Tabs color-coded, dates highlighted, terms underlined. He'd known exactly what he was doing. Every signature was his. Every initial. Every acknowledgement of risk. Dad had refinanced twice in the last 5 years. Once in 2020. Again in 2022. I found the original loan documents first. 2015. A smaller amount back then. $600,000. Reasonable for a business that size. Used to upgrade equipment, expand the client base, hire 2 new employees. The payments had been manageable. But then came 2020. The pandemic. I remembered that year. Dad had been stressed. Mom said he was working late every night, trying to keep clients from canceling contracts. The print industry had taken a hit. Businesses weren't ordering marketing materials, event programs, promotional packages. Everything went digital. Everything went quiet. The first refinancing had been survival. He'd borrowed against the business to keep it afloat, to keep paying his employees, to keep the doors open when half his clients disappeared. I could see his logic in the notes he'd written. Keep the team together. This will pass. We'll recover. And they had. Sort of. By 2021, business was picking back up. Not to where it had been, but enough to breathe. But then 2022. Another refinancing. This one bigger. More aggressive. I read through the terms carefully. He'd consolidated the previous loan and taken out additional capital. The notes in the margin told the story. Equipment aging. Need to modernize to compete. Marcus ready to take over. Needs strong foundation. He'd been preparing to hand the business to Marcus. Wanted to give him something impressive. Something that looked successful. So he'd borrowed. Heavily. The payments were quarterly. $65,000 every 3 months. I did the math in my head. $260,000 a year. Just in loan payments. That didn't include operating costs, payroll, materials, utilities, insurance. The business would need to generate serious revenue to cover that. Consistent revenue. No dips, no slow quarters, no lost clients. Manageable. If the business stayed profitable. I read through the profit and loss statements Dad had tucked into the folder. The last 2 years showed the business hovering right around the break-even point, after loan payments. Some quarters were better than others. But there was no cushion, no safety net. One bad quarter and the whole thing could collapse. If it dipped, even a little, the lender could force a sale. That clause was buried on page 7 of the loan agreement. I almost missed it, but Dad had highlighted it in yellow, drawn a star next to it in red ink. Acceleration clause. In the event of payment default, or significant revenue decline, defined as 15% or more below projected quarterly revenue for 2 consecutive quarters, lender reserves the right to demand immediate repayment of outstanding principal or forced sale of collateral assets. 15%, 2 quarters. That was nothing. A few lost clients. A slow season. A piece of equipment breaking down at the wrong time. The lender could take everything. Marcus didn't know. I sat there in that small bank room, staring at the documents, and felt my stomach drop. Marcus had no idea what he'd actually inherited. He thought he'd inherited an empire. A $2 million business, free and clear. He'd been talking about it at the funeral reception, telling people about his plans. Expansion, new services, digital integration, hiring a full marketing team. He'd been talking like someone who just won the lottery, but he hadn't won anything. He'd inherited a ticking clock. A business that looked impressive on paper but was one bad quarter away from foreclosure. A legacy that required perfect execution just to survive. And he didn't even know the clock was ticking. I flipped through the documents again, slower this time, looking for anything that might explain why Dad hadn't told him, why he'd kept this secret. That's when I found a handwritten note clipped to the loan agreement. The paper was different from the others. Personal stationery. The kind Dad used for birthday cards and thank you notes. His handwriting was shakier here. This had been written recently, probably in the last few months of his life. Liv, Marcus doesn't know the business is mortgaged. He thinks it's free and clear. It's not. The house is. I gave you the asset. I gave him the debt. I'm sorry, but I knew you'd be okay. I wasn't sure about him. Dad, I read it once, twice, 3 times. My hands started trembling. Not from sadness. Not from shock. From understanding. Dad had done this deliberately. Intentionally. With full awareness of what he was creating. He'd given Marcus the business knowing it was underwater. Knowing Marcus would have to fight for it. Knowing he might fail. And he'd given me the house. Fully paid off. No strings attached. No debt. Because he knew I didn't need the test. I'd already proven myself. Already built a life on my own terms. Marcus had always had everything handed to him. The attention. The mentorship. The assumption of success. Maybe Dad finally realized that wasn't helping him. Maybe he realized Marcus needed to struggle. Needed to prove he could handle real pressure. Or maybe Dad just knew I deserved security more than Marcus deserved glory. I sat back in the chair. Stared at the ceiling. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere in the building, a phone rang. My hands were shaking. Not from sadness. From something else. Clarity. Cold creeping. Strategic clarity. Dad hadn't made a mistake. Hadn't forgotten to tell Marcus. He'd done this on purpose. Every decision had been calculated. The refinancing. The debt. The will. The separate letter to me. The hidden key. He'd set up a test. A real one. The kind Marcus had never faced before. He'd given Marcus the appearance of success. The title. The pride. The thing everyone would congratulate him for. The business. The legacy. The name on the door. And he'd given me the foundation. The security. The thing no one would take away. A house worth $850,000. Paid off completely. No mortgage. No liens. No debt. Something I could live in, sell, rent, do whatever I wanted with. Something that was mine without conditions. Dad had known exactly what he was doing. He knew Marcus would overreach, would spend, would assume, would hire new people and buy new equipment, and talk about expansion without ever checking the foundation he was building on. Because that's what Marcus did. That's what he'd always done. Assumed success. Assumed support. Assumed everything would work out because it always had. And he knew I wouldn't, because I'd never had the luxury of assumption. I'd always had to check, to verify, to make sure I had solid ground under my feet before taking a step. Dad had given each of us exactly what we needed to learn who we really were. I closed the folder carefully, put it back in the box, locked it with hands that had finally stopped shaking. Walked out of the bank with the documents under my arm, feeling the weight of them, not just the physical weight, the paper and folders and metal clips, but the weight of knowledge, of power, of choice. Got in my car, sat in the parking lot, stared at the steering wheel, at my hands gripping it, at the manila folder on the passenger seat, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power, not revenge, not yet, just leverage, the knowledge that I knew something Marcus didn't, something that would change everything for him, and the choice, entirely mine, of what to do with that knowledge. I could call him right now, warn him, show him the documents, help him understand what he was really dealing with, or I could wait, watch, see what he did when reality hit, see if he'd finally learn what I'd known my whole life, that success isn't given, it's earned, and sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones nobody teaches you. I started the car, pulled out of the parking lot, and drove home in silence, the folder sitting next to me like a secret I wasn't sure I wanted to keep. Marcus called me that afternoon. He sounded off. "Hey Liv, got a minute?" I was at my apartment, the documents spread across my kitchen table. I'd been reading them for hours, making notes, understanding. "Sure," I said, "what's up?" "I'm going through Dad's files, business stuff, and I'm seeing what kind of discrepancies, loan documents, refinancing agreements. I didn't know Dad had taken out loans against the business." "Oh," I said, "is that a problem?" "I don't know yet. The accountant is looking at it, but it's complicated, more complicated than I thought." He sounded frustrated, not panicked. "Not yet. Did you see anything unusual in the will?" he asked. "Any paperwork that mentioned loans or debt?" I paused, just long enough to sound like I was thinking. "No," I said, "just the house and the business. That's all Mr. Callahan went over." "Okay, yeah, I figured. It's probably just old paperwork. Dad refinanced a few times over the years. Normal business stuff." "Probably," I said. "All right. Thanks, Liv. I'll let you know if I need anything." "Sure." He hung up. I set my phone down, looked at the documents. Marcus had no idea what he was walking into. The business owed $1.8 million. The quarterly payments were $65,000. The first one was due in 6 weeks. If he missed it, the bank could start foreclosure proceedings. If he made it, he'd have to pull from operating capital, which would hurt cash flow, which would make the next payment harder. It was a spiral, and Dad had known it. I thought about calling Marcus back, telling him, warning him, but I didn't, because for the first time in my life I had something he didn't. Information, and I wasn't sure I wanted to give it away. I didn't plan to use it, not at first. 2 weeks later, Mom called. She wanted to host a family dinner, to celebrate Dad's memory. I almost said no, but curiosity won. I drove to Mom's house on a Sunday evening. She lived in a small bungalow in southeast Portland, cozy, neat, the kind of place that smelled like vanilla candles and regret. Marcus was already there when I arrived. He looked tired, thinner, his shirt was wrinkled. "Hey Liv," he said, didn't get up, didn't hug me. "Hey." Mom was in the kitchen pulling a casserole out of the oven. She smiled when she saw me. "Sweetheart, I'm so glad you came." I helped her set the table. Marcus sat in the living room, scrolling through his phone. We ate in near silence. Mom asked about my work. I gave short answers. She asked Marcus about the business. He gave long ones. "It's a lot," he said. "More than I expected. Dad's filing system was a mess. Contracts all over the place. Some clients haven't been billed in months." Mom nodded sympathetically. "Your father was brilliant, but organized he was not." Marcus laughed, a tired sound. "Yeah, I'm working 80-hour weeks just trying to understand what I inherited." I cut my chicken, said nothing. "And there's this loan thing," Marcus continued. "Turns out Dad refinanced a few times, took out some debt to keep things running. It's manageable, but it's more than I thought." "How much?" Mom asked. "About $1.8 million. Mom's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "That's a lot." "It's fine," Marcus said quickly. "The business generates enough revenue to cover it. I just have to stay on top of the payments." I took a sip of water, kept my face neutral. Marcus looked at me. "Honestly, Liv, you got the better deal. The house is simple, paid off, no complications. I'm dealing with a nightmare. It wasn't malicious. It was dismissive, like I'd been given the easy option because I couldn't handle the real responsibility." Mom didn't correct him, just nodded. "Well, I'm sure you'll figure it out, honey. You always do." I set down my fork, smiled. "You're probably right," I said. But inside, something shifted. The empathy I'd been holding onto, the part of me that felt bad for Marcus, that wanted to help, disappeared. Not because I hated him, because he would never see me as capable, as strategic. as strong. To him, I would always be the backup, the one who got the consolation prize, and I was done trying to prove otherwise. I finished dinner, helped Mom with the dishes, said goodbye, drove home in silence, and stopped feeling sorry for him. I stopped feeling sorry for him that night. Over the next month, I watched from a distance. Marcus started posting on social media, pictures of the print shop, captions about building the legacy, and honoring Dad's vision. He hired 2 new staff members, bought a new industrial printer, talked about expanding into digital services. He was spending like the business was debt-free. I checked public records, the county assessor's website, business filings. The first quarterly loan payment was due in 2 weeks, $65,000. He hadn't made it yet. I knew because I'd called the bank, pretended to be following up on estate paperwork. The representative confirmed the payment was still outstanding. Marcus didn't know it was coming. Or he did, and he thought he had more time. Either way, he was about to get a very unpleasant surprise. I didn't call him, didn't warn him. I told myself it wasn't my responsibility. But that wasn't entirely true. I was waiting, watching, seeing what he'd do when reality hit. 3 weeks later, Marcus called again. This time he was angry. Liv, did Dad ever mention anything about a loan payment schedule? I was at a coffee shop, working on a client presentation. I closed my laptop. What do you mean? The bank just contacted me, said I missed a payment. $65,000 due 2 weeks ago. Oh, I said, that's a lot. I didn't even know it was due. There's no record of it in Dad's files, no calendar reminders, nothing. That's strange, I said. It's more than strange. It's a fucking mess. And now the bank is threatening penalties, late fees. They're talking about reviewing the loan terms. He sounded panicked now, not just frustrated. Can you cover it? I asked. Yeah, I can cover it, but it wipes out most of my operating capital. I was planning to use that for payroll and equipment maintenance. That's tough. Did Dad say anything to you, before he died, about the business? About debt? I paused. Let the silence stretch. No, I said. He didn't really talk to me about business stuff. It wasn't technically a lie. Dad hadn't talked to me. He'd written it down. Marcus exhaled. Okay. Yeah, I figured. I just thought maybe he mentioned something. I'm sorry, I said. I wish I could help. It's fine. I'll figure it out. He hung up. I sat in the coffee shop, staring at my laptop screen. Marcus was scrambling, realizing the business wasn't what he thought, and I was watching it happen, not with satisfaction, not yet, just with a cold, quiet awareness that this was always going to happen. Dad had known, and now I knew. He didn't ask me for help. He never thought he'd need it. 3 weeks later, Marcus showed up at my apartment. I wasn't expecting him. It was a Saturday morning. I was in sweatpants, drinking coffee, reading. The knock was sharp, insistent. I opened the door. Marcus looked rough, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes. His jacket was wrinkled. Can I come in? He asked. I stepped aside. He walked past me into the living room. Didn't sit, just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking around like he'd never seen my apartment before. Maybe he hadn't. I need to talk to you about something, he said. Okay. He turned to face me. His expression was serious. Not angry. Not yet. Just determined. The business is in trouble, he said. I said nothing, just waited. The loan is bigger than I thought. The payments are crushing, and the revenue isn't where it needs to be. Dad was covering the gap with refinancing, but I can't do that anymore. The bank won't approve another loan. I'm sorry, I said. I've been meeting with accountants, lawyers. Everyone says the same thing. I need to inject cash, fast, or I'm looking at foreclosure. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not sympathy, something harder. How much do you need? I asked. 400,000, maybe 5, enough to stabilize cash flow and cover the next few payments while I restructure. I nodded slowly. That's a lot. I know, but there's a solution. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I knew what was coming before he said it. You should sell the house. The words hung in the air between us. I stared at him. What? The house. It's worth $850, paid off, liquid. If you sell it and reinvest half, just half into the business, we can stabilize everything. Save Dad's legacy. I felt my pulse in my throat. You want me to sell the house, I said slowly. The house Dad left me. It's just a house, Liv. It's my house. And the business is Dad's life's work. It's what he built, what he cared about. If we lose it, everything he worked for is gone. I shook my head. He left the business to you. He left the house to me. That was his choice. He didn't know the business was underwater. If he'd known, he would have done things differently. How do you know that? Marcus's jaw tightened. Because I knew Dad. He wouldn't have let the business fail. Then why did he mortgage it? I asked quietly. Marcus didn't answer, just stared at me. My phone buzzed. Mom's name on the screen. Marcus gestured to it. Mom agrees. We talked about it. She thinks it's the right thing to do. I picked up the phone, put it on speaker. Hi, Mom. Sweetheart. Her voice was soft, careful. Marcus told you about the situation. He did. I know it's a big ask, but it's just a house. The business is the legacy. It's what your father would have wanted. I looked at Marcus, at the phone, at the walls of my apartment, and felt the old instinct to comply rising in my chest. The people-pleasing, the guilt, the fear of being the difficult one. But this time it met something harder. No, I said, the word came out quiet, steady. Marcus blinked. What? No, I'm not selling the house. Mom's voice came through the speaker. Olivia, the house is mine. The business is Marcus's. That's what Dad wanted. If he'd wanted me to sell the house to save the business, he would have said so. You don't know that, Marcus said. Neither do you. He stared at me, confused, like he couldn't process what was happening. Liv, this is the family business. Dad's legacy. You're really going to let it fail because you want to keep a house. I'm not letting anything fail, I said. You inherited a business. I inherited a house. What you do with the business is your responsibility, not mine. Mom's voice was pleading now. Sweetheart, please, just think about it. Sleep on it. This is about family. I have thought about it, I said, and my answer is no. I hung up. Marcus stood there, staring at me like I'd just spoken a language he didn't understand. I don't get it, he said. Why are you being like this? Like what? Selfish. The word landed like a slap. I felt something crack inside me. Not pain, something colder. Get out, I said. Liv, get out of my apartment, Marcus. He opened his mouth, closed it, shook his head. Then he left. The door closed behind him. I stood in my living room, alone, feeling my heartbeat slow. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for saying no. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Marcus didn't call for 3 days. When he did, his tone was different, sharper, suspicious. I need to ask you something, he said. I was at the house, my house. I'd started going there in the evenings, sitting in the living room, imagining what it would look like if I actually lived there. Okay, I said. Did you know about the loan before the will was read? I felt my stomach tighten. What? The loan? The debt? Did Dad tell you about it? Did you know the business was mortgaged? Why would I know that? Because you're acting like you did. You're acting like you knew I was walking into a trap. I didn't know anything, Marcus. Then why won't you help? Because the house is mine. Dad left it to me. That's not a trap. That's a gift. Or it's guilt, he said. Maybe he felt bad for always choosing me, so he gave you the house to make up for it. I closed my eyes, breathed. Maybe, I said. Or maybe he gave me the house because he knew I'd take care of it, and he gave you the business because he thought you could handle it. Are you saying I can't? I'm saying it's not my problem. He was quiet for a long moment. You're different, he said finally. You've never been like this before. Like what? Cold. I almost laughed. I'm not cold, Marcus. I'm just done. Done with what? With being the backup. With being the one who's supposed to sacrifice so you can succeed. With being invisible. I never made you invisible. You didn't have to. Everyone else did it for you. He hung up. I sat in the house, my house, and felt the weight of 34 years lift off my shoulders. Mom called an hour later. Olivia, what is going on? Her voice was tight, strained. What do you mean? Marcus is upset. He thinks you're hiding something, that you knew about the loan before the will was read. I didn't. Then why are you being so difficult? I'm not being difficult. I'm protecting what's mine. The business is family, Olivia. The house is just property. Then why did Dad leave it to me? She didn't answer. Mom, I said quietly, did you ever wonder why Dad gave me the house and Marcus the business? Because the business was always going to Marcus. Everyone knew that. Right. Everyone knew. Because Marcus was the golden child, the one who mattered. That's not fair, isn't it? She sighed. Olivia, I know you felt overlooked sometimes, but your father loved you. He loved both of you. I know he did, but he loved us differently, and he left us different things for a reason. What reason? I don't know yet, but I'm not giving up the house to find out. Mom was quiet. Then, he's your brother, Olivia. I know. Then act like it. She hung up. I sat in the silence, looked around the living room, the fireplace, the built-in bookshelves, the hardwood floors that creaked in all the same places they did when I was a kid. This house was mine, and I wasn't giving it up. Not for Marcus, not for Mom, not for anyone. I didn't hear from him for 2 months. By then it was too late. I found out through Mom. She called on a Tuesday evening. Her voice was shaking. Marcus is filing for bankruptcy. I was at my apartment, cooking dinner. I turned off the stove. What? The business. He can't make the loan payments. He's been trying to sell equipment, but it's all collateral. The bank won't let him. He's trapped. I sat down at my kitchen table, felt my chest tighten. When? I asked. Next week. His lawyer says it's the only option. If he doesn't file, the bank will foreclose anyway. At least this way he has some control. I'm sorry, Mom. Are you? Her voice was sharp. Because you could have prevented this. No, I couldn't. You could have sold the house. And then what? Marcus would have burned through that money too. He was spending like the business was free and clear. He hired new staff, bought new equipment. He didn't even check the loan terms before he started expanding. He didn't know. Exactly. He didn't know. Because he didn't ask. Didn't look. Just assumed. Mom was crying now. This is going to destroy him. No, I said quietly. It's going to teach him. She hung up. I sat at my table, staring at the wall. Marcus was losing the business, the thing Dad built, the thing Marcus thought was his birthright, and I'd watched it happen, not because I wanted him to fail, because I'd finally stopped trying to save him. The bankruptcy filing went public 3 weeks later. It was in the local business section. Small article. Family business crumbles after founder's death. There was a picture of Marcus standing outside the print shop. He looked exhausted. I saw it shared in neighborhood Facebook groups. Former clients commenting. Some sympathetic, some not. The narrative that emerged was that Marcus had mismanaged the legacy, spent recklessly, didn't understand what he'd inherited. It wasn't entirely fair, but it wasn't entirely wrong either. I didn't comment, didn't share, didn't engage, but I read every word, and I understood finally what Dad had done. He'd given Marcus the appearance of success, the title, the pride, the thing everyone would celebrate, and he'd given me the foundation, the security, the thing no one could take away. He knew Marcus would overreach, knew I would hold steady. It wasn't cruelty. It was a final quiet lesson, and a gift. Marcus called me once, late at night. I could tell he'd been drinking. You knew, he said. His voice was slurred, angry. You fucking knew. I didn't deny it. I knew Dad loved us both. Differently. That's bullshit. You knew about the loan. You knew I was walking into a trap, and you just watched. I didn't set the trap, Marcus. Dad did. I just didn't pull you out of it. Why? Because you never would have learned otherwise. He laughed. A bitter, broken sound. Learned what? That you're not invincible. That Dad's approval doesn't make you untouchable. That sometimes the person who gets the spotlight is the one who needs it most, not the one who deserves it. He was quiet for a long time. I hate you, he said finally. No, you don't. You're just realizing I'm not who you thought I was. He hung up. I sat in the dark, feeling something I hadn't expected. Peace. I didn't go to the bankruptcy hearing, but I heard what happened. Mom told me. She called a week later, her voice flat, defeated. It's done, she said. The bank took everything. The equipment, the client list, even the name. Smith & Sons is gone. I'm sorry, Mom. Marcus is moving back in with me, temporarily, until he figures out what's next. I closed my eyes. How is he? Broken. The word hung in the air. He'll be okay, I said. Eventually. Will he? Her voice was sharp. You took everything from him, Olivia. No, I didn't. Dad did. I just didn't fix it. That's the same thing. It's not. She hung up. I sat on my couch, staring at the ceiling. Marcus had lost the business, lost the legacy, lost the thing that defined him, and I'd watched it happen, not with satisfaction, not with revenge, just with the quiet, steady knowledge that this was always going to happen, because Dad had designed it that way. He'd given Marcus the test, and Marcus had failed, not because he was stupid, not because he was cruel, because he'd never had to struggle, never had to prove himself, never had to wonder if he was enough. I had, and that's why I got the house. I started renovating a month later, not to sell, to live in. I was moving back to Portland, to the house, to the space that was always supposed to be mine. I hired a contractor, painted the walls, refinished the floors, updated the kitchen. It felt like shedding skin, like becoming something new. One afternoon while I was painting the upstairs bedroom, I found another note from Dad. It was tucked inside an old book on the shelf, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, one of his favorites. The note was short, just a few lines. Live, you'll know when it's time to let go. Don't carry anger, just live well. Dad. I sat on the floor, holding the note, feeling tears I didn't know I had, not because I was sad, because I was free. Dad had known I'd find this, known I'd need it. He'd left me breadcrumbs, instructions, permission, to let go, to live, to stop carrying the weight of being second. I folded the note, put it in my pocket, and went back to painting. I saw Marcus one last time. It wasn't planned. 6 months after the bankruptcy, I ran into him at a coffee shop near the old neighborhood. I was picking up a latte. He was sitting by the window working on a laptop. He looked different, thinner, quieter, older somehow. We made eye contact. He didn't look away. Neither did I. I walked over. Hey, can I sit? He gestured to the chair across from him. Sure. I sat, set my coffee down, looked at him. He looked tired, but not broken. Not anymore. How are you? I asked. Getting by. I'm working for a printing company in Beaverton. Sales. It's not what I thought I'd be doing, but it's okay. That's good. Yeah. We sat in silence for a moment. I'm sorry, he said finally, for how I treated you, for assuming you'd always just go along with things. I nodded. I thought I knew what I was doing, with the business, with everything, but I didn't. Dad gave me something I wasn't ready for. He gave you something he thought you could handle. Marcus shook his head. No, he gave me something he knew I'd fail at, and he gave you something he knew you'd succeed with. I looked at him, really looked at him. He gave you the safe option, Marcus continued, because he knew you didn't need to prove anything. You'd already proven it to yourself. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was understanding. I hope you find your footing, I said. I'm working on it. We finished our coffees in silence. Then I stood. Take care, Marcus. You too, Liv. I walked out of the coffee shop, feeling lighter than I had in years, not because we'd reconciled, but because we'd both finally let go. I never told him about the letter. Some things he didn't need to know. I finished moving into the house in early spring. The renovations were done. The walls were painted. The floors gleamed. The kitchen had new countertops and appliances that actually worked. It didn't look like Dad's house anymore. It looked like mine. I planted a garden in the backyard. Tomatoes, herbs, lavender, flowers I didn't know the names of but liked the colors of. I worked the soil with my hands, feeling the earth under my nails, the sun on my shoulders. It was repetitive, grounding, peaceful. Mom visited once. She stood in the doorway, looking around at the changes, the paint, the furniture, the art on the walls. It looks beautiful, she said quietly. Thank you. She didn't stay long. We had tea on the porch, talked about small things, the weather, her book club, my work. She didn't mention Marcus, didn't mention the business, and I didn't bring it up. Before she left, she hugged me, a real hug, not the polite, distant kind. I'm proud of you, she said. I didn't know if she meant it, but it didn't matter, because I was proud of myself. I thought about Dad often, not with anger, not with bitterness, with a complicated gratitude. He wasn't perfect. He played favorites. He let Marcus believe he was invincible, and let me believe I was invisible. But in the end, he saw me. Not as the backup, not as the consolation prize, as the steady one, the one who'd be okay. He gave Marcus the test, and me the foundation, and maybe that was the fairest thing he could have done. I didn't know if Marcus would ever understand, but I did, and that was enough. I don't know if Marcus ever understood, but I did. I sit on the porch of the house one evening, watching the sunset over northeast Portland. The sky is orange and pink and purple. The maple tree Dad planted the year I was born sways in the breeze. I've built a life here, freelance clients, a small circle of friends who actually see me, a home that's mine. I think about the moment in the lawyer's office, Marcus's smirk, Mom's silence, my own hollow numbness, how far I've come from that, not through revenge, through refusal to shrink, to sell myself short, to save people who never saved me. The house wasn't a consolation prize, it was a foundation, and I built everything else on top of it. My phone buzzes, Marcus's name on the screen, a text, hope you're doing okay. I stare at it for a moment, type back, I am, you. He replies, getting there. I smile, not because we're close, not because everything's fixed, but because we're both finally free of the weight of proving something we never needed to prove. I lock my phone, look out at my garden, at the tomatoes ripening on the vine, at the lavender swaying in the breeze, and I feel for the first time in years like the protagonist of my own story, not the backup, not the second choice, not the one who got the consolation prize, the one who got exactly what she needed. Dad was right. I was always paying attention. I just stopped waiting for anyone to notice.